Our next speaker is Michelle Craske, who has been a longtime member of the One Mind family. Michelle is a clinical psychologist and distinguished professor at UCLA. Michelle holds the Miller Endowed Chair in Psychology, is director of the Anxiety and Depression Research Center, and is associate director of the Staglin Family Music Center for Behavioral and Brain Health at UCLA. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this very, very important set of talks. And as has already been well described, the COVID-19 pandemic is a firestorm for mental health. So it's no wonder that rates of depression, anxiety are increasing. Some reports are that the rates have increased 3 to 4-fold. And of course, the exact rates due to COVID-19 may not be fully understood for years to come. We were already facing a mental health crisis before COVID-19, with rates of depression, anxiety, suicidality increasing globally, especially among the younger age groups. And of course, the pandemic has just exacerbated that crisis. We face enormous challenges, but what I want to emphasize in my brief talk today is that we also have very clear pathways to meeting those challenges and reason for hope. Now, the first challenge that was already mentioned is stigma and prejudice around mental health. It's obviously the case that we've come a long way. Nowadays, we're much more accepting, especially the younger generation, but nonetheless, fears of negative repercussions persist, and fears not only add to the pain of the person who's suffering, but also deter them from seeking help. So we need to really work on this issue. And of course, there are groups leading the way, including the enormously important work of One Mind, and the various celebrities and athletes who are speaking out and encouraging others to do so. I've been inspired by organizations, particularly my home country, Australia National Football Association, believe it or not, who now publicly declare the need for days off for mental health as much as for physical health recovery. But aside from public engagement and policy making, there's another untapped pathway, and that is the science that already exists around the topic of bias and prejudice more broadly. We need to bring that science to the topic of prejudice around mental health. And at UCLA, we have taken on a grand challenge for reducing the burden of depression by 50% by the year 2050. And it's called the UCLA Depression Grand Challenge. And one of the major pillars of our challenge is the topic of stigma around mental health. And to that end, we have brought together a team of scientists and scholars from many different disciplines, all tackling the problem of mental health stigma and finding ways forward. Now, the second challenge is getting help. The bad news is that less than a half of individuals with mental health problems receive any kind of help, and that's in the United States. In California, it's more like 37%. And of course, the pandemic is stretching our mental health resources even thinner. We have made great strides over the last few decades in terms of evidence-based treatments. So the good news is that there are treatments that work. And even better news is that we're continuing to develop more laser-targeted, more personalized, and therefore more effective treatments. And that is another major pillar of the UCLA Depression Grand Challenge. Here, we are studying depression from all angles, from genes and cells to brain to behavior, so that we can better understand the causes of depression, the maintaining factors of depression, and then use that information to develop treatments that are more honed and precise to the needs of each person. As one example, we've developed a new treatment for symptoms of anhedonia, or loss of interest or pleasure in usual activities, that's really been difficult, if not impossible, to treat up until now. And we're using virtual reality as a tool to facilitate that new treatment for anhedonia. And we, the Depression Grand Challenge team, have partnered with Apple to develop behavioral tracking tools from smartphones and wearable devices so that we can track behaviors like sleep and activity. And we believe that these tracking tools will help elucidate how depression differs between people and how it changes over time within the same person. And with that, we'll then be able to enable greater precision in preventing self-harm, in deciding when is treatment most critical, and even which treatment is likely to be most effective. In other words, these behavioral tracking tools offer the promise of even more personalization and thereby more effective treatments. But the challenge, back to the challenge, how do we make these evidence-based approaches to treatment and tracking more widely available? As I said, less than 1/2 receive any kind of treatment, let alone state-of-the-art treatments. And there will never, ever be enough clinicians to meet the need. So we need a new methodology, a new model to meet the challenge of the mental health gap. New technologies provide the answer. Using smartphones and the internet, we can detect and actually deliver treatment to depression and related conditions on a scale that has not been previously imaginable. We at the Depression Grand Challenge have developed a system of care for screening, tracking, and treating depression and anxiety called STAND that relies upon these technologies. It begins by a symptom screening that can be conducted anywhere at any time on any internet-connected device. And that screening gives immediate, within minutes, feedback and routes the individual to the appropriate level of care. So for those with none to mild symptoms, we offer cognitive behavioral therapy online for prevention purposes, and that is self-guided. For those who are mild to moderately depressed or up to severely anxious, we provide cognitive behavioral therapy programs that are online but supported by coaches who are trained and certified and provide guidance by remote video chat. And for severely depressed or suicidal individuals, we triage them to clinician-delivered care, nowadays by telehealth. And so in this model, we reserve the trained clinicians for those who have the most acute needs, thereby making it a scalable model. But we do more, because we continuously track symptoms. Once people enter the STAND system of care, we're tracking, and that enables us to adapt the treatment to match their needs as they evolve over time. So, for example, we rapidly switch people to a higher level of care if their symptoms worsen in order to prevent full relapse, or we switch people to a lower level of care to maintain therapeutic gains. And then on top of all of that, the continuous tracking enables us to respond immediately 24/7 to suicide alerts. Now, this fully integrated and adaptive system of care was developed to be transportable to any setting, to educational settings, to health settings, to workplaces. And we have successfully implemented this system of care at the UCLA campus for students, and we're now preparing to implement it in the UCLA health system. But what I want to finish with is talking about our latest development, where we are now implementing the STAND system of care in community colleges, starting with East Los Angeles College. Why? Because community college students face daunting challenges. Their rates of mental health are much higher than other four-year programs, for example. One estimate saying 50% of community college students are suffering a mental health problem. And that intersects with enormous life challenges. Of those with mental health problems in community colleges, 1 in 4 are homeless. 1 in 4. And over 2/3 struggle with housing and food security. And yet, by far the majority don't have access to any mental health resources. So with demonstrated success of our STAND program at East Los Angeles College, our vision is for the STAND program to become available to all community colleges in California and even elsewhere. Remember, for many community college students, attending college is their ticket to economic advancement. And for that possibility to be blocked by untreated mental health problems is simply a tragedy. So we aim to make mental health resources through STAND available to all community college students. And I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. By some measures, depression and anxiety are the #1 cause of disability worldwide, and your efforts to better treat them are outstanding. I wanted to ask a related question. What can we do in the area of prevention to reduce the onset and incidence of these conditions?
I think prevention is absolutely critical. You know, in many ways, once mental health problems emerge, they have a scarring impact. And what I mean by that is they tend to create greater risk for future episodes. And of course, there's the suffering that comes with each of those. So prevention is critical. There are programs for youth, parenting programs, school-based programs that have been shown to be effective. They are still costly and not easily implementable. And what we have done is taken a version of our STAND program to treat at-risk kids 12 to 16 years of age using a mindfulness-based intervention, again with certified and trained coaches who provide help by video remotely. And we're doing that in Imperial Valley, where the rates of anxiety and depression are higher, the rates of poverty are very high, and the access to mental health resources is almost nil. And we believe that, again, by demonstrating success in these kind of settings, these online programs with coaching could become a real avenue for preventing the onset of depression and anxiety as these kids grow up.
Michelle, that's great to hear you doing that work in Imperial Valley to help people who have lack of access to mental health care, especially young people, where the most help can be most effective throughout the course of people's lives. You were talking earlier about lack of access for so many people to mental health care. We have a question from the audience. Wes and Gail Lynn Ayers asked this question. It's actually been voted up twice by 2 others, so there's a lot of interest in this question. She says, I was reading an article in The Economist about COVID-19 and mental health that mentions how hundreds of grandmothers in Zimbabwe were trained as lay counselors in order to provide talk therapy within the community who do not have access to treatment. How might seniors with a lifetime of experience help to provide love and support in this manner in our country?
That's a great question, and it ties broadly to the issue of paraprofessionals that has been brought up before. And you can see in our STAND system of care, we rely on paraprofessionals to do coaching, and we train coaches to fit the needs of the setting in which we are working. So in community colleges, our coaches are other students, so we actually train the community college students to be the coaches. When we go into health settings, we work with different kinds of coaches, but older age groups and providing support is yet another extremely interesting avenue to follow. And I think the critical issue here is adequate training and developing not just models of supervision so that the coaching and the paraprofessional support is done with high fidelity, but models of coaching that are in themselves scalable. So we need some systems, and we're playing around with how to do that ourselves, that are more automated, that provide ongoing supervision and feedback to keep the paraprofessionals at their highest level of quality of care. But it's just a fantastic idea.
That's exciting, Michelle. Great to hear about the technology augmentation for extending the ability of paraprofessionals and professionals to reach more people in need. Thank you, Wes and Galen, for your question. That's an excellent question. Another question in the audience from Emilia Zmergala. Can the STAND program be adjusted and implemented in public school K-12 setting as well? Another question in the audience, similar, can it be available in high schools?
Can the STAND system of care be implemented in high schools, I think is what you're asking, right? Sorry, it was a bit difficult for me to hear. But theoretically, yes. When we go into community colleges, the biggest issue is, as I described, our highest level of care is clinicians. So we still believe that while digital mental health is extremely valuable, it is simply not enough for somebody who's suffering with extreme depression or is suicidal. And so you always need to have that clinical level of care available and reserved for those with the greatest need. So STAND can go into any system as long as there is a support mechanism to provide the clinical level of care. For community colleges, we're working with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. They are the group that are providing the level of care that is clinical in nature. And so I think as long as there's that option, yes, this program would suit in high schools.
Michelle, I have one more question for you before we move on into the program. You mentioned virtual reality as a treatment for anhedonia. That sounds very sci-fi. Can you say a bit more about that, please?
Yes, it's sci-fi indeed. You know, when we work with patients who have anhedonia, the nature of the problem is that it's very difficult to be motivated to want to engage in rewarding activities. But we know that if you can engage in those kind of activities, it can be beneficial. But simply asking somebody to do that is a struggle, especially if they've become chronically isolated and there's very little available to them that could be rewarding. What virtual reality does is it brings the positive experience to the person. So it becomes this excellent tool for providing an experience and then working around that to teach what we teach in our treatment, which is attention training, to how to attend to the most positive features, memory training, how to encode and retrieve that parts of the experience that were most positive and practice that over and over again in order to facilitate, if you like, the brain muscle for positivity.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michelle.